Ever since Donald Trump suggested a mass ethnic cleansing of Gaza with the U.S. taking over, my mind keeps going back to this kind of haunting interview that I saw with Yeshayahu Leibovitz, the great Israeli Orthodox social critic, and really kind of an inspiration for my book, Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza. And Leibovitz had used the term Judeo-Nazi to refer to the mentality in certain corners of Israeli politics. It's worth noting that by using that, he would have potentially made himself an anti-Semite, according to the definition of anti-Semitism that's just been adopted by Harvard University. But Leibovitz was on a TV show, and he was being challenged very aggressively, in particular by a politician named Tommy Lapid. And Lapid, who was himself a Holocaust survivor, says to Leibovitz, "Are we burning them? Are we burning them? Are we putting them in gas chambers?" And there's this long pause from Leibovitz, and he doesn't say anything, and then he says, "That is your prophecy." And what I think Leibovitz is trying to say was not that Israel has committed a Holocaust against Palestinians back then or in Gaza. I don't think what's happened in Gaza is the equivalent of the Holocaust. I don't think those analogies are helpful at all. But I think Leibovitz was saying something different, which is to say, we as Jews, because we are human beings, we have the same capacity to commit the worst crimes in human history as any other group of people. And what will prevent us from committing those crimes, or will prevent any group of people from committing those crimes, is the recognition that it is possible. And if you deny that it is possible, then in fact there is no limit to what could possibly happen. So it was, to me, a really horrifying irony to see in the last few days that after Trump called for forcibly expelling 2 million Palestinians from Gaza, that Tommy Lapid's son, Yair Lapid, said that he thought in general it's good. He replied to Trump's response by saying, "It's good." Lapid is not a right-wing politician in Israel. He's a centrist politician in Israel. And this was the response from many people in Israel and the United States that are not by any means considered on the far right. Benny Gantz, Israel's other most prominent centrist leader, called the idea creative, original, and intriguing. Ben Caspit, one of Israel's most prominent kind of prestigious mainstream centrist columnists, said that every Israeli, barring the most delusional ones on the outer reaches of the left, ought to welcome this initiative. Similarly, in the United States, you saw again and again, not on the far right, not on people who are on the margins of the American Jewish community, but people who are in the mainstream, responded to this not with horror, but with a certain amount of intrigue, if not open support. So the American Jewish Committee said it was surprising, concerning, and confused, but then went on to say, an AJC official, at the same time, one has to say it is a dramatic, out-of-the-box attempt to shake up the regional dynamic, and I recognize that in a frozen, stale conflict, sometimes out-of-the-box proposals serve a purpose. Alan Dershowitz said,
"This is the first bold, new, out-of-the-box thinking about Gaza, and it shouldn't be rejected out of hand."
John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary magazine, said that after all, the United States had taken in lots of people from Mexico and Central America, so why shouldn't Egypt and Jordan have to take Palestinians? Not ignoring the fact that the people coming from Mexico and other places are coming voluntarily trying to get insights, as opposed to people being expelled from their homes. Rich Goldberg of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, on Dan Senior's influential podcast, said let's not imagine that we're in some paradigm that can't shift. Paradigms keep shifting, certainly. Lee Smith in Tablet magazine wrote, "Trump, in his innovative mercy, has offered to save the Palestinian people from their own history and give them a new idea to live by. They should thank their maker for the chance to start anew and give thanks." This is, I think, what Leibovitz was saying to Tommy Lapid, that these are the horrors that will lie in store for us if we don't recognize that a state that is not subjected to any external moral standard, where we say that international law should not apply, that this is what can come true, and worse than this can come true. Just listen to the quotations of the people that I have been quoting. Again, I'm not quoting people from the far, far right of the American-Israeli political spectrum. I'm quoting people from the center of the American political spectrum, and ask themselves, what confidence would you have that these people would object if the answer to Gaza was not simply expelling people, but killing all the people in Gaza, right? There is absolutely no suggestion in any of these comments of any absolute moral red line which would lead people to say, enough, this and no further. And this is what it means to worship a state, to treat a state as an idol. It justifies itself no matter what it does. This is the moral catastrophe that has been unfolding slowly in Israel and in the American Jewish community simply is now reached a new kind of crescendo, right, in which Israel, and with America's help, destroys an entire society and then says, well, the place is destroyed, so you'd better leave, right? It's worth noting, by the way, that a lot of these people weren't really willing to admit that Gaza was actually destroyed, right? That the hospitals, the buildings, the schools, the agriculture were just, they weren't willing to admit that until it became convenient for them to say that, so that they could say that the people should have to go to other countries. The obvious point would be that if Gaza has been destroyed by Israel with America's help, and people in Gaza cannot safely live there, then people in Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza, should be able to return to the homes from which their families are from. And those homes, those communities, those lands are not in Egypt, and they're not in Jordan, and they're not in Malaysia, they are in Israel. Most of the people in Gaza are refugees who were expelled from their lands in 1948. Many of them can see the lands from Gaza itself. You know, and it's remarkable that people say, well, you know, the people who are defending this proposal, well, sure, there's some practical issues that we might have to figure out about how to resettle people in Egypt and Jordan. But they suggest, they talk about it as if it's something that could be overcome, right? Practical issues, logistical issues, we can work on those. Yeah, there are practical and logistical issues that we involve with Palestinians returning to the lands they're from in Israel and living equally alongside Israelis, right? But those practical and logistical issues are never willing to be confronted, because the basic assumption is that Palestinian life is worthless, right? And that you can do whatever you want to Palestinians, but you can't inconvenience Israelis at all, and you can't question the nature of the state at all. And that's what leads us to this place. It is, as I say this as someone who loves the American Jewish community and lives my life in the American Jewish community and could not imagine another way of living. It is utterly horrifying to see the degree to which people who enjoy great legitimacy and respect in our community are willing to support something that would be considered one of the greatest crimes of the 21st century, and that we don't have the capacity at this moment to call these people who do this what they are, which are people who are engaging in a moral monstrosity.